but I'm on Twitter. I should be. All right, guys. We are hopefully live on Twitter. Let's just see. Mark, can you verify that we're live on my Twitter feed? Do you see us?
Hang on one second.
Okay.
Yeah, looks like we are.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're live on Twitter. Now, where's my chat window? Okay, chat. Okay, so we should have a chat window. Okay, great. You are live. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so welcome to the Kruger podcast, episode 62, I think. I may change that in the show notes. I'm here with Mark Jeffery, an old friend and Bitcoiner and technologist, and we're going to be talking about Thor chain. And Mark I've known about Thor chain for a while, but Mark kind of re-brought it to my attention recently. And yeah, we'll do it live, Bill Riley.
Do it live.
We'll do it live. And Mark brought Thor chain to my my attention a month ago, and he said, "Fred, there's this pretty interesting new lending thing happening on Thor chain, and it integrates with Shapeshift." And I was like, my first reaction was, "Oh no, another Terra Luna." That was exactly my reaction.
That was my initial reaction as well. I had the same sort of thought.
Okay, so why don't we go back to Terra Luna and tell everybody about? Why don't we educate everybody as to what Terra Luna was and why it blew up?
Yeah, so Terra Luna was a algorithmic stablecoin. So if you look at something like Tether for comparison, in the Tether universe, you have to deposit a fiat dollar into a fiat bank account in order to mint one Tether, right? So theoretically, and there's some debate about this, but theoretically, if there's $1 billion worth of Tether out there, there's $1 billion sitting in a bank account like Bank of America on the fiat side somewhere, backing that billion. But that's not very capital efficient, right? So there were attempts to make purely algorithmic stablecoins, which were fully divorced from the fiat banking system, right? Because the fiat banking system can always shut you off. So the idea was let's make dollars that nobody can shut off. And so there have been many, many attempts at this. One of them was, one of the most famous ones was Terra Luna. And the idea there was that there was one coin called Luna, which was speculative. So its value rose and fell depending on whatever the market said its value was. And you needed this Luna coin to burn it to make Terra, which was the dollar denominated stable coin, right? So that was its dollar coin. And basically the idea was the more popular the usage of the Terra coin was, so the more people were using that stable coin, the higher the value of the Luna token would go. And this actually did work quite well for years and gained a lot of followers. Fred, you remember you and I were discussing this back in the day. There was a moment in time where, like most of my friends were telling me I was stupid for not buying Luna. And you're just like, you're going to miss it. And, it's a done deal. It's going the distance. And I looked at it and I was like, this thing is a Death Star because it has a single point of failure. And that single point of failure is that if for whatever reason Luna devalues, that's the only thing backing the Terra token. And all of the Terra dollars will immediately fall apart. And I don't know why Luna would devalue, but if it does, and it does it fast enough, the entire house of cards will come down very fast and very horribly, which did happen. And it happened far faster than even I had guessed. So I figured it would, take a couple weeks or something. And it fell apart completely and utterly in about 48 hours.
Okay. So there was also this element of yield on
yes. Anchor.
Right. Yeah, Anchor, the Anchor. So explain what that was, the Anchor protocol.
Yeah. So what sort of drove the popularity of the Terra stablecoin was that you could put it into a protocol called Anchor. Okay. And Anchor gave you, I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, 20% APY on your dollar. So Why would you want to hold Terra dollars? Well, you can put it into Anchor and get 20%. Where was that coming from? Well, they were just minting more Terra effectively and giving it to people. So, but this was okay for a little while. But where else can you get 20% on your dollars, right? So everybody wanted the Terra stablecoin over,
and especially at that time, interest rates were zero. Like you could put your money in the bank and you would get 0.1%.
Yes.
Or you could get 20% on Anchor.
Yes. Yeah. So this thing was like, it was highly attractive as a stable coin. Right. There were other things I played around with, like, I always was bringing up MIM, Magic Internet Money, right? But I liked that better. It wasn't perfect, but I liked it better because it was backed by 30 or 40 different assets. It wasn't just backed by one asset, Luna, right? So if one of those 30 assets fell apart, the MIM stablecoin would not fall apart. Just that little piece of it would. And it was always, over collateralized by 2x. So the idea was, if we lose an engine on the plane, not a big deal. We got 29 more, right? So that's kind of it.
So neither of us had anything to do. We didn't get involved. We didn't lose any money on Terra Luna.
Correct.
But we saw it, and we were like, and we know a lot of people who kind of got their feathers clipped on that one.
Yep.
And so now we kind of go around to this Thor chain, right? And why don't you kind of explain the premise of this Thor chain lending?
Yeah, let's just back up a little bit, because you have to understand sort of how Thor chain itself works.
Okay, perfect.
So Thor chain. So I thought I ignored Thor chain for a very long time because I heard about it. I was like, oh, it's another stupid chain. Who cares, right? Like, we've heard a million of these. There's always like another chain, right? So I didn't really. I'm like, there's nothing special about this one. Who cares? But I didn't really understand. It's not really a chain. It's really a cross-chain DEX, which uses a chain in the middle to sort of facilitate the cross-chain DEX. And the token Rune is the lingua franca that it uses. It's sort of the universal token that it uses to trade from one chain and coin to another chain and coin. So everything is always translated into Rune in the middle and then translated back into whatever on the other chain. And the liquidity pools, there is no such thing. The liquidity pools are always paired with Rune. So there's Bitcoin Rune, Ethereum Rune, right? So there is no Bitcoin Ethereum liquidity pool like there is, like Uniswap and other things have, right? So everything is paired with Rune. That drives the value, or that drives the demand for Rune, because you can't be an LP in these liquidity pools unless you.
Well, let's back off for some Bitcoiners. They may not know the term liquidity pool. So I want to go really slow because.
I see. Yep.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Look, my audience is almost all Bitcoiners. So there's no liquidity pools in Bitcoin. So explain what a liquidity pool is.
Yeah. So a lot of Bitcoiners would be familiar with centralized exchanges, right? Like Coinbase or whatever, because that's usually where you get your Bitcoin, right? So in order to create a decentralized version of Coinbase, the software that runs it has to have both coins in more or less equal amounts available for trades. So, so for people that want to trade Ethereum for Bitcoin or Bitcoin for Ethereum, there has to be, usually Coinbase has like a big pile of coins, like Scrooge McDuck, right? And they're fine. They can accommodate any trade at any time. Right. But the software-based, no human-involved robot version of Coinbase needs the same thing. So what this robot will do is it'll go to the masses, so us, and it will say, hi, people with coins. If you supply me with your coins, if you loan me your coins so I can use it as this liquidity pool, I will give you a slice of the action on any transaction fees that I make. Right. And this can be very high. It depends on the volume of trading, right? So a lot of people love these liquidity pools because it's just passive income for coins that would just normally be sitting in their ledger. So everybody wins in that deal. Now, right? So is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, it's a pretty good example, and I would say the number one thing, the sort of the company that invented this really or pushed it really forward is a company called Uniswap, right?
Yeah.
And Uniswap is ran now it's on a few chains, but it really ran just on Ethereum. And Uniswap allowed anybody to kind of create a liquidity pool for their token against ETH, right? Or against, as you said, other tokens, right? So that you can have pools between any two tokens. So Thor chain uses these kind of same concept of liquidity pools and AMMs, as they're called, right? And these pools have tokens. Do they have tokens or do they just pools? I'm not sure, actually. Like if you provide liquidity on one of these pools, how does that work?
Oh yeah, you don't get LP tokens.
You don't get an LP. So it's just like you just get an entry into a database.
I'm not positive about that. Actually, I should check myself on it. I don't think you do, but
you don't. I'm pretty sure you don't. Yeah, I'm agreeing with you.
Always. So that's just not how Rune seems to think.
Right. So just to be clear here, you know, when you own if you participate in a liquidity pool and you provide both sides of the liquidity in a liquidity pool on Uniswap, you get a little token saying, okay, you have these liquidity pool tokens, right?
It's your code check for the liquidity that you provided.
Yeah. Exactly.
For the system, right? So you come back and be like, oh, you put in this amount of ETH and this amount of Bitcoin. Great, here it is, plus your profits. Thank you.
And so Thor chain, you know, I like this way of saying it's really more of a DEX than a chain. It is actually built on top of Cosmos, right? So it's a Cosmos chain, and Cosmos is sort of a chain that allows other chains to be built on top of it. Basically, is the best way I can describe it. And so so it is its own blockchain, but it's using the Cosmos sort of blockchain infrastructure. They didn't have to reinvent that. They just sort of said, we're going to use Cosmos for this. And our value add is going to be these liquidity pools and DEXs. And now this new feature, which is this borrowing, right? So this thing is, I have to say, it is incredibly unique. I've never seen anything like this. And you and I have looked at, I don't know, 100 different, I mean, just an enormous, we look at everything, right? And I've never seen anything at all like this, this thing. So my first impression was this cannot work. And it must be a Terra Luna. Now I'm still not 100% sure it's not a Terra Luna, but I did put Bitcoin in there, and I know you did too. So we both feel like it's worth a shot at least. So why don't you explain the mechanics of kind of how this thing works as a person using this system? How did you use it, and how can other people use it?
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to emphasize to your audience that I am a mostly Bitcoin guy. I always have been. Ever since I wrote 2 books on Bitcoin, one in 2013, one in 2015, so fairly early. And you know, sort of the bulk of my bags has always been Bitcoin. And during the DeFi craze, but unlike you, I've gotten deep in some DeFi things also, and some other chain things also, because I find them interesting, and I think that there's good stuff. There's a lot of bad stuff, but I think there's a lot of good stuff there also. Yeah. Not everyone agrees. I know a lot of your audience does not. But one of the things that sort of bummed me out about being a mostly Bitcoin guy was my Bitcoin, I couldn't do anything with it, right? It just sat there, and it was sort of bricked. And when Thorchain came along, and particularly this lending protocol, I suddenly felt like, oh, I can do things with it, or BSC20s as well, right? Like I felt like my Bitcoin was active again in the way Ethereum-based things were active for the first time, right? So in the Ethereum universe, there are all these lending protocols that exist, like Aave, et cetera, where you basically put up your collateral at whatever it is, and it can be multiple.
Let's just take a side bet. Let's just show people what Aave is, because I think that's
okay. Go ahead. Yeah,
that'll be a useful thing. I'm just going to pull it up on my screen. Okay, so this is Aave. And can you see my screen?
I cannot. So I'm not sure.
Okay, wait 1 second. Where is this? The share. Okay, share screen. Share. Oh, I see. Why? Okay, now you can see my screen. Okay. So this is Aave, right? They call it an open source lending protocol, right? And as you can see, there's $17 billion with this thing. And if I go into the Ethereum market, you can sort of see there's people have supplied almost $2 billion of wrapped Bitcoin on this into this market as collateral, right? There's $4 billion worth of wrapped staked Ethereum and $2 billion of Ethereum and a bunch of other stuff. People have supplied Tether and other stuff. So you can supply something as collateral, right? And then if you want to borrow it, you can borrow, say, Tether. Okay, there was $700 million or $800 million worth of borrowed Tether, and you're going to pay 15% in order to borrow it, right? If you want to borrow Ethereum because you think Ethereum is going to go down, you can borrow it for 2%, right? So the rates of borrowing are pretty high. You're going to be paying a 15% is pretty high on USDC, and right now you're going to pay a 28% interest rate on USDC. Sorry, 16% on Tether. 28%. So it's really expensive right now to borrow on this Aave. And
plus you forgot one of the most important things is
you can get liquidated.
You can get liquidated.
Right.
And that happens a lot. Right.
Okay.
So basically if the value of your collateral that you provide dips below sort of a safety threshold, like basically you can borrow 50% of whatever you put in for collateral, more or less. So if you start approaching the value of your collateral, they want to liquidate you before you get there, right? Because they don't want to, because otherwise.
And by the way, that liquidation can happen at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
Right. So you're just dreaming of sheep in the meadow, and then there's a wick down, and then right, because somebody fat fingered a sell order, right?
Yes.
And then all of a sudden you wake up and your Bitcoin has been liquidated, right? Your wrapped Bitcoin or your whatever you put up as collateral.
Yes. Which
that just terrifies me, right? This is just absolutely terrifying. Like, I would not use this thing for that reason, right? The idea of getting flash liquidated, it just terrifies me. I would not trust my Bitcoin to this.
Crypto is too volatile for this liquidation based universe. Although, as you point out, there is an awful lot of activity on these lending platforms. It gets massive demand for it, right?
Which tells me that there could be potentially massive demand for this Thor, which we're going to get into, right?
Right.
Because it's definitely there is product market fit, right? There definitely is a lot of people wanting to lend their Bitcoin out, right? In this Aave and get money, and there's definitely a lot of people who want to use their Bitcoin as collateral to borrow more, right? That's really the key driving force. Those people are saying, I'll lend you my Bitcoin, I'll put my Bitcoin up for collateral, but I want to borrow from that Bitcoin. Yeah. So that's Aave. And there are other solutions, right? So there are solutions like Ledon and Unchained Capital, and there's a bunch of places where you can sort of use your Bitcoin as collateral. But I would say that every single one of them right now will have some version of this liquidation process.
Yeah, and also for most of them, you have to put your Bitcoin. And first of all, you have to get wrapped Bitcoin. You can't just use native Bitcoin on the Bitcoin chain. You have to convert it into wrapped Bitcoin. And something like 1% of all Bitcoin is wrapped Bitcoin. I don't know the exact figure right now, but it is significant. It's single digit percentages of the entire Bitcoin ecosystem is now held up into wrapped Bitcoin. So,
right. So you have to convert those fees to do that. I mean, it's not frictionless, right? Because you can't just there's no kind of place you go and just say, send my Bitcoin, wrap it for me it's like you really literally need to buy this other thing called wrap Bitcoin in the secondary market.
You need to sell your Bitcoin for wrap Bitcoin.
Right. So there's you could be looking at 10, 20 basis points of slippage easy each way, right?
Plus, just a pain in the ass, right?
It's a
just
pain in the ass, right? Yeah,
the step you don't want to encounter. So
right. And so Thor, however, does not do that, right? So Thor, what it does is you now say, I'm going to borrow money from Thor. I'm going to borrow some Bitcoin from Thor, right? Or I'm going to borrow something from Thor, right? So I'm going to put up, let's just say I'm going to put up 1 Bitcoin in collateral, right? So 1 Bitcoin's worth roughly $70,000. So Thor says, okay, Fred, you're putting up 1 Bitcoin as collateral. You can borrow $35,000 worth of something. Is that correct?
correct.
Okay. So now I say, great, I would like to borrow $35,000 worth of additional Bitcoin. So it says, great, you can get half a Bitcoin borrow. But now the 1 Bitcoin that you put up as collateral, we're going to kind of quote unquote owe it to you, right? We're going to hold on to it, but we're not going to really give you any transparency. We're just going to say, we owe you 1 Bitcoin. Now, if you come back to us and you say, I'm going to give you the $35,000 worth of something, we're going to give you back your 1 Bitcoin, right? And this is all handled programmatically by the protocol, right? So this is not some guy at Thor saying, okay, Fred, yep, looks good, I'm going to give you back your Bitcoin, right? This is the protocol itself that's sending you this thing back. So it's completely automated. You can do it at 2 a.m. It doesn't matter. As long as you have the keys, you're getting your Bitcoin back. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Yeah, and it's important to note you're doing that on the Bitcoin chain directly. There's no wrap Bitcoin required.
Right. You are given a Bitcoin deposit address. You send your Bitcoin to that address. You're done.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and your loan can, if you borrow Bitcoin, you can borrow raw native Bitcoin on Bitcoin.
Right. So you can get your Bitcoin and you can move that Bitcoin to your favorite cold storage wallet, and you got actual Bitcoin. So, and I've done it, and you've done it too. So we both have done it. We both understand that thing. So now let's now walk through the
there's a few points I want to make sure. So the loan is denominated in dollars.
Correct.
So if you borrowed 35,000 worth of something, and your 1 Bitcoin that's in Hawk, that's in the pawn shop, becomes worth $1 million, right? Then even if the asset that you borrowed goes from 35,000 to 100,000, you still only owe $35,000 worth of whatever, and you can pay back in any sort of coin, right? So,
now, there's two amazing things about this. One is the interest rate.
Yes.
The first thing is the interest rate is 0. Okay.
Yeah.
So we just saw Aave. Like if you're putting up Bitcoin, you want to borrow dollars, you're paying a 16% interest rate if you want to get those dollars in the form of Tether. And you're paying a 23% interest rate if you want to get those dollars in the form of USDC. So that's really high. And by the way, that can change any day, right? So you may be coming in tomorrow, it'll be 40%, like it could be like Argentina, right? So, and in fact, I was a little shocked because last time I looked, it was like 7% on Tether. So it's doubled in the last, month that I looked, last 3 weeks that I looked at Aave. So it's highly volatile. And, this again is kind of compounding against you. So, you better have collateral because this is sort of coming out of your balance. And as if you don't have enough collateral, boom, you're going to hit a liquidation point.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so the second part is there's no liquidation,
and that is just magic. Like it can't. As someone has played around with a lot of these things, that cannot be overstated how awesome that is. You never have to worry about being liquidated ever, because basically before in any of these other systems, anytime the broader market just took a nosedive, which happens a lot in crypto, and it happens at 3 a.m. most of the time, right? Usually, there's mass liquidations that occur, and those liquidations then cause more liquidations, right? So as prices drop, shitstorm begets shitstorm begets shitstorm. And so the cascading liquidations And that's what happened to Terra Luna, right? Like the whole thing just once the ball starts going, the
And by the way, it went. I remember looking at it. My friend Ben Singer, we have a mutual friend, and he was actually with Tim Draper on the day that this thing was unwinding. And he was calling me, yeah, I'm with Tim. And he was like, I'm talking to Kathy Woods, and what do you think is going to happen with Terra? And I go, what's the price? And he's like, Terra's trading at 93%, 93 cents on the dollar. And I go, oh, that's bad. And then he goes, oh, it'll bounce. And then it's like, it's 80 cents on the dollar. That was like 1 hour later.
Yeah.
And then it was like, I'm like, okay, this is going to zero. And then sure enough, like another hour later, it was like 2 cents on the dollar. So when these things can go down like this, they can go down incredibly fast, right? And you're not used to kind of how these flywheels can work against you, but they can work against you, in a day,
Yeah, cascading liquidations, like acceleration begets acceleration, right? So by making a universe like Thor Chain has, where there are no liquidations,
right,
that danger is now gone, right? At least of cascading liquidations, because there's never any liquidations.
Well, there still could be like a run on the bank, quote unquote.
There still can be. There are other dangers, but that particular danger is well caged by the no liquidations.
Right. And so the other thing is there's no term on this loan. It's not like you have to it's not normal. Like you have a mortgage. There's your mortgage is due. It's a 30-year mortgage, right? You have to pay your loan. You go to a normal thing. It's like, okay, I want you go to a loan shark, from the mafia. The guy's like, you got to give me my money back in 2 weeks, otherwise I'm going to start breaking things, But here, there's no term. There's no term. There's no interest rate. There's no liquidation. So it's very odd, right?
Yeah, and there's no KYC.
Right.
Well. That's
another really big thing. So Thor Chain, you're just putting your Bitcoin in. They don't know who you are, and you're just putting it in. And so, one of the other things beside this thing, before we get into the mechanics of this, Eric Voorhees is I'm not saying behind this, but is a big supporter of this protocol, and has been for a while. And that definitely, the fact that he sort of was behind it made me look twice, right? Because if it was just sort of some random sort of thing out of China, I probably would be like, okay, I'm not interested. You know what I mean? But Eric, being who he is and the integrity that he has, it made me really look twice. And I don't know. He may watch this thing or not, but he follows me and you, I think, on Twitter, and we both follow him. And so, I think we're very interested in anything that he says is you got to take it seriously. That's all I can say. And I would just say one thing is, Michael Saylor had a video of like how he onboarded his board of directors of MicroStrategies, and what he did is he played a video of Eric Voorhees debating Peter Schiff to the board of MicroStrategies.
Yeah.
So that tells you that Voorhees is
Voorhees is a Daniel Webster like dude. Like it does feel like you're listening to like one of those great orators, right?
Exactly.
He does have that vibe. So.
He does have that vibe. So anyways, what now happens behind the scenes? So we both done this thing. You did it to actually borrow some Rune, correct? I did. And I decided just to get more Bitcoin, right? And so now we're sitting on, your Rune went up, my Bitcoin went up, your Rune went up more, but Rune's on a tear, but okay. So what now has happened when you did this borrow? Well, let's do me, because it's a little bit easier, right, for the Bitcoin. So I put, let's just say I'm going to use the word 1 Bitcoin. I put a little bit more than 1 Bitcoin, but let's just say 1 Bitcoin. Fred puts 1 Bitcoin into Thor, right? What happens under the hood?
Yeah, so under the hood, so the protocol accepts your 1 Bitcoin. it then immediately sells that 1 Bitcoin for Rune. So it just, and using its own internal DEX, right? So it's got its own exchange. So it just sells the 1 Bitcoin for Rune. And so now it's got it in Rune. It then takes that Rune and splits it in half. So half of that Rune is burnt. So it basically so your Bitcoin was used to buy Rune, and then it was burnt, immediately destroyed. That Rune doesn't exist anymore. The remaining Rune is then sold for Bitcoin, because you want to borrow Bitcoin from the system.
Right.
So you use the remaining Rune to buy that Bitcoin and then give that Bitcoin to you.
So there's nothing left out of this. So basically, I put a Bitcoin in. It says, "Great, let's burn half of that Bitcoin." Right? We're gonna trade it for Rune. We're gonna burn half that Rune, and then the other half, I'm gonna trade it for whatever you want. Oh, you want Bitcoin? Great. I'll do the exact reverse of the previous transaction for half the volume. Yes. If you just want Rune, I'll just give you the Rune because I happen to have it. So boom, here it is. If I want Ethereum, great. You could swap the Rune for Ethereum. Here it is, right?
Yeah. So there's two things I want to point out about what I just said. First thing is that with Aave and other similar protocols, when you supply collateral, it goes into a smart contract somewhere where it just sits.
Right.
So there's a honeypot for people to attack to steal your stuff while it's in the code check, right? So, and that has happened on multiple occasions. In the Runeverse, right? There is no honeypot; it just doesn't exist. It's gone. Right? There is no Scrooge McDuck vault filled with everybody's collateral because everything is immediately translated into Rune, right? So, the second thing I'll point out is that just the way it works, it puts buy pressure on Rune. It basically theoretically creates demand for Rune because the system is buying Rune every time it does a loan, right? So theoretically, that should inflate the price of Rune as the loans get more and more popular. So whether it does or not, nobody knows, but that is the idea behind the design.
Okay, so now let's talk about the liquidations, right? So now it's not liquidation; it's not the right word. Let's talk about people redeeming their code checks and saying, "Great, I borrowed some, I borrowed $35,000 to buy Bitcoin. Great. I'm going to give you back the $35,000, and I would like my collateral back, please." Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I gave you 1 Bitcoin. Okay. You gave me $35,000 worth of something, whatever it doesn't. You don't really care what it is, but now I'd like the 1 Bitcoin back. But however, Bitcoin went 10x now. So now you're going to have to buy, unless Rune also went up 10x, right? You're going to have to mint enough.
Well, we haven't talked about what happens yet on the reverse.
Let's do that.
Let's
do the reverse. Go ahead.
We want to hear from you, but just let me explain that first.
Yeah, sure.
So I explained how you borrow. Now the redemption is you come back with $35,000. Let's just say it's Bitcoin, just for simplicity. So it is your example again. It doesn't have to be, but let's just say it is. So you come back with $35,000 worth of Bitcoin. You send that into the system and you say, "I want my Bitcoin back." The system will take your $35,000 worth of Bitcoin and turn it into Rune, just like it did last time, right? So it makes it into Rune. But now Bitcoin is worth $1 million. So in order to give you your 1 Bitcoin back, it's got $35,000 worth of Rune. Now it needs to mint $1 million minus 35,000, whatever that is. I can't do math in my head, but whatever that is, worth of Rune. So it mints that. It creates it out of thin air.
955,000. Yeah.
Yes. And then it buys a Bitcoin from its internal market and gives it back to Fred. So it's minting Rune, which is causing the opposite to happen, right? That will put sell pressure on Rune, which will make the price go down. And especially if everyone is redeeming at the same time, that is one of the dangers of this system, is that everybody sort of rushing to redeem could cause the price of Rune to crash. So that is one of the
So what are the safeguards to this? Because I think there are a few, right? So
there are a few. So My own opinion of this is that everything always has a weakness to the design somewhere, and it's just a question of then how do you cage that weakness and bolster it against the worst case possible scenario. So in Rune's case, this minting and burning of Rune is really what makes the magic of this lending protocol work. There is a maximum Rune supply of 500 million. It will never mint more than 500 million. The current Rune supply, because of all the burning that has gone on, or not minting, I'm not sure which it is, but there's only 417 million currently in circulation. The lending protocol itself, we know, has burned 9.37 million to date, and it's 60% full. So what I would say is that the lending protocol itself is caged into a very small corner of the overall Runeverse, right? So even if the worst case scenario happens in the lending where everyone's redeeming at once, it shouldn't even come close to swamping that 500 million maximum Rune supply. So we should be fine in sort of any case. That said, if we're not fine, the protocol has backup pools of Rune that are specifically meant to, be broken. A glass that meant to be broken in an emergency, you can break in there and use that Rune instead of minting Rune to do redemptions. You can use the emergency pool to do redemptions. So it's got that backstop. Now, if all that fails, then so how was it different from Luna? Luna was completely unbounded, right? Completely unbounded, right? Rune has been bounded into this little tiny segment of the entire overall Rune universe. That is a very, very big material difference. So on top of sort of all the other safeguards that we've discussed. So the worst case scenario is that it reaches the 500 million maximum Rune limit and cannot mint anymore, in which case the lending protocol just shuts down, and it waits until a time where Rune rises to a price sufficient to begin redemptions again. So the redemptions, basically the bank closes, if you will, and then we just wait for the market to come back. And when the market comes back, then the redemptions can begin again because Rune price rises sufficiently. So that's the idea.
Great synopsis. I want to show everybody, just so just a little bit of a warning. This is what we were talking about with Terra. Okay. I don't know if you can. Let me see it here. So this is Terra Luna. Okay. So what we see here is, in February of 21, there was $2 billion worth of this. Then it actually was still stable. And then July of 2021, there was 3. Then it went kind of nuclear. And then it started, there was $30 billion, right? And then in 2022, that's when it just went berserk. And you can't even see this, but if you go here, it went all the way up to 139 billion. And then it went to 0, right? So, I'm not saying Thor will do this, because right now there's only a maximum of, I think, $200 million worth of lending that can be done by the protocol as it is right now, right? And so this mad rush to 139 billion is not possible.
Can't happen.
Can't happen, right? So that is the biggest problem that Terra Luna happened. And Do Kwon just kept on saying, no, more. 200 billion, that's too little. I'll do $1 trillion. I'm going to be bigger than Bitcoin, right? So it became kind of the mad, like the mad king, who just kept on, as the numbers got bigger, his ego just got bigger and bigger, and it got crazy. So I love personally the fact that this thing is capped out a couple $100 million. I almost view it as like it's kind of an experiment. I don't think it's going to go terribly wrong as long as they don't uncap it.
Yeah, the cap is the thing. I agree.
And I kind of feel like it's right now. It's again, I may be famous last words, and this is not investment advice, right? But I kind of feel like they've kind of opened this thing up, almost like an experiment to say, hey, let's just show you what you can do under these circumstances. I think the terms are amazing, right? Will it break? will it break? I mean, you can't beat the terms. Will it break? It may break. It may be hacked, right? Like Thor chain has been hacked before, and
long time ago, to be fair, and under very different conditions.
Very different conditions.
It has been hacked.
So anything when you get these complicated kind of protocols with smart contracts and stuff, there can be actual bugs in the code, right? And even if it's audited, there can still be vulnerabilities, and hackers can find the vulnerabilities. I would say that is a danger here, right? Like you don't have that danger if you just hold Bitcoin, because at this point, if there was a core bug in Bitcoin that enabled it to be vulnerable, I think it would have been hacked at this point.
Yeah,
and it's not changing. But these kind of protocols, they're relatively new. With all the even if they have the best intentions, they can still be hacked.
Yeah. Well, also, I would say, I mean, there's a lot of people who are sort of skeptical of this, and I completely understand the skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
But I would also say that I entertain these things because I feel like somebody is going to crack lending and other things sooner or later, the same way Satoshi cracked digital decentralized money, right? Before Satoshi cracked it, there were a lot of different attempts that all failed, right? So
yeah, that's something that's really worth mentioning, right?
Yeah.
Because, there was even like venture backed things like Beans. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Whoopi Goldberg was the
no, that was a different one. That was Flues.
Yeah.
Flues.
But there were a number of these things in the 90s. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So there was a lot of people had this idea of digital money, you make it really easy to send money. And like nobody figured out how to do it in a decentralized way before Satoshi. That was really the genius of Satoshi. But I agree with you. Lending is.
But it looked like, so we're at a moment in history right before Bitcoin where it looked like that was just impossible and there was nothing that could ever work, right?
I agree.
Howard Flight looked like it was impossible before the Wright brothers, right? Like, so lending is potentially not impossible. And I just sort of feel in my gut that it's not. And I feel like this is a very good stab at it. It might be the solution ultimately, but it looks really good to me. So,
well, I was on another space and people were talking about Michael Saylor and his new using MicroStrategy as a kind of a Bitcoin development company. And some people were like, well, maybe he's going to figure it out. Maybe he could. And I think, look, whoever figures out lending is going to be that's going to be the next big thing, right? To do lending at scale with Bitcoin is going to be really big, right? Because our whole economy, everything works on credit, right? Most people do not have enough money to just outright buy their house. They need a mortgage, right?
Borrowing against native Bitcoin. So basically the largest DeFi market on earth is Bitcoin, and the biggest thing you can do in DeFi is borrowing and lending. Right. So if somebody figures out a way to allow people to never sell their Bitcoin, but just borrow against it and it's stable, holy shit, that will be enormous. So I do think that this thing has monstrous potential.
Let's answer some of the questions in the audience. So somebody, let me go back. How is Rune different from Luna? I think we've covered that one. Sounds horrible. I would never risk my person. Listen, I mean, maybe, right? This is like
that was my first reaction too, so I totally get it.
I totally get it. And by the way, I would not risk 100% of my Bitcoin on this either. You know what I mean? Like I just want to be very clear. It's a very small percentage of my Bitcoin. I have a lot of Bitcoin, and so I would not risk even more than a small, very small. In my case, not even sort of sub single digit of my Bitcoin, right? A sub single, not even a 1% of my Bitcoin that I'm risking for this. But I'm very intrigued by it. Somebody asked, can you refinance? Can you refinance? Let's say Bitcoin goes up and you want to get you just want to get your debt out. How can you? So what I think what he's saying there is, listen, this is an example. I put one Bitcoin out.
Yeah.
Bitcoin goes to 10x, right? I want to now, I want to basically pay off my loan and be done with it. And the answer is, yeah, you can. You can redeem at any time. Anytime you want to redeem all or part of your loan, you can.
No, sorry, you have to redeem all of it. So,
oh, I'm sorry, you're right.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you have to pay back. You can't just penny ante it. You have to pay back 100% of it.
Okay, you're right. You're right. I forgot about that.
So, yeah.
And the other point is, you can't do it immediately.
That's right. Actually, we forgot to talk about that.
Yeah.
There's a 30-day wait, so you have to wait 30 days. So to redeem your loan.
Some people were also confused. I know people have asked me this question. There's a choice when you go to this thing about, do you want to use the Thor wallet or Shapeshift wallet? What do you have to say about that?
So I've done it twice. I have direct experience with it, and I've used different wallets both times. I prefer the Shapeshift wallet.
Okay.
The Shapeshift people have just done an insanely good job with the UI, and also Shapeshift. The Shapeshift wallet is a multi-coin wallet. So if I wanted to put Bitcoin, native Bitcoin up as collateral and receive Rune, on the Thor chain, which is what I did.
Right.
You have to use the Shapeshift wallet or something else that's a multi-chain wallet.
Right.
I then subsequently came back and used my Ledger wallet because I wanted to see what is this like with a, what is this like using a hardware wallet, right? So I used that, and the protocol would only let me borrow Bitcoin because it's a Bitcoin wallet, right? So yeah, so it's sort of single-minded about Ledger.
Well, I think both of us, without having done tremendous amount of research, I think both of us would recommend this Shapeshift as a from a user interface point of view. I'm a big fan of UI and good UX, and I would commend them for having done a great job on the user interface. Very, very clear. It's everything about that web wallet. It's just amazing to me. I think it was very well done. People ask, what are the min-max loan amount? I don't think there's a minimum. There is a maximum because there's limit to the protocol, but I don't think anybody's going to be over the maximum.
Yeah, you could. I think I haven't tested this, but I think you can borrow up to the limit of the protocol itself.
Right.
So it doesn't care, so you personally don't have a limit.
Right. I don't think there's any.
Yeah. If you're the first person in and you wanted to borrow all 200 million, you could do it. Then the protocol would be full. Nobody else could get in.
Now, I think Thor chain might have some kind of yielding product. I don't know. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, this I don't remember. I seem to recall seeing that somewhere, but I didn't dig into it because it's not really,
because a lot of people have asked me, like, Fred, where's the yield coming from? And I'm like, for this particular application, there is no yield.
Right.
There is no interest rate. It's zero. So it's the 0% doesn't come from anywhere. There's no concept of interest rate here.
Well, I can tell you that the liquidity pool. So a lot of people remember we discussed that earlier, and this might be the first time people are hearing about liquidity pools. But if you supply liquidity coins to the DEX, the decentralized exchange, you do make yield in the form of transaction fees. So you get a piece of the action for being a liquidity provider.
Right. Yeah, and then we should also talk a little bit about these Thor chain nodes, because this thing is all backed by these validators, right? And these guys themselves have been bonded, to the tune of $10 million each. So, I think that's worth saying, because a lot of people say, well, they're just going to rug you, and
they can't. So the way I understand it is, and this is not something I've dug into as hard, but I trust Voorhees and some of these other people who have done the super deep dive on that part of it, is that they basically rigged the game so that it's more expensive to rug someone than just to be honest. So it actually you could steal the money, but it would cost you more money to steal the money than the money that you're stealing is worth. So that's sort of, so if you're the so maybe there's a Joker out there, right, or a Riddler who operates in an insane fashion. They're like an insane criminal who doesn't care about losing money, but most criminals are into getting money. So it's pretty good defense. And yes, the validators they each have to run full nodes of every chain that that the DEX is trading in and out of, and they put up, and they have to put up a bunch of rune themselves, which creates buy pressure for the rune token to basically be a validator. And these validators in aggregate have voting power, and they have a DAO, and they're the ones that deciding how big the loan space is, right? So right now it's 200 million or so. The DAO could vote to open that up to 400 million down the road. They might, I think they will do that if this is a success. But I also think they're a pretty conservative bunch. So I think they're going to be extremely careful with that. But there's a danger there that they could not be careful.
Right? Well, it's also potentially, I look at it as also like, if the worst happens, this DAO could vote to sort of reorganize a little bit, right? So
that's true. So it's good also in the others respect. So yeah, they could reorganize the chain. The DAO could basically also, all right, it hit the 500 million cap. The value of Rune is never going back to what it needs to in order to allow redemptions to resume.
Right.
So we're gonna add another 100 million Rune to the system just to sort of provide liquidity again and get the redemptions up and running again. So that they could do something like that, sort of like what happened to Ethereum and the DAO hack, right? Where they basically decided to rethink things and reboot the chain. Is that decentralized? Well, sort of not, but practically it did work, right? It was the right
along the same lines. What somebody asked me, not on this chat, but they said, "What if Rune is deemed a security or Thor chain or in general? What if they get into trouble? How does that impact you as a person that lent the chain effectively, your Bitcoin?"
Yeah. So, well, I mean, nothing happens to the Thor chain or the DEX, so all that remains up and running, or the lending protocol. The Rune token may be taken off of centralized exchanges, so we might see it vanish from. I'm not sure if it's on Coinbase. I don't think it is. But I think probably Kraken and some other places carry it. So I think those places, if they are not registered for securities trading, we may see it delisted in a few places. But I think the majority of overseas exchanges would still list it. And certainly the Thor DEX itself would still offer.
Right. So because this thing is its own DEX, in a way, there's not really any risk of delisting because it's almost its own purpose of being is to provide this DEX, right?
Yes. Yep.
So delisting does not seem now. It may be that the Thor chain principles and they get some cease and desist order that I don't know. That's possible, right? But that's probably it's probably going to take a long time if that happens. And again, look, there could be a run on the bank, right? I don't expect it to be a run on the bank, but there could be a run on the bank.
Yeah. So if the run on the bank in this universe is defined as all of the lendors or lendees redeeming trying to get their collateral back at the same time,
right? And
that causes a massive amount of new Rune to be printed to buy the collateral to return to the borrowers or to the lenders, right?
So what are some of the, before we go, what are some of the use cases of this lending? Because I was talking to the developer, Chad.
Yeah.
Who's great, by the way. Look, I mean, he was fantastic and kind of spaces and stuff. And, I asked him, I said, what are you most excited about people using this for? Because I'm using it just to speculate and buy more Bitcoin. That's my thing. But there's a lot of people who may have other uses, like I need to pay my IRS bill, and I just don't quite have the, I don't quite have the cash on hand. I don't want to sell my Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
So do you think it's more of a short-term loan type thing, or do you think it's more of a long-term speculative play, or how do you sort of see this thing being used?
Man, I mean, just like Ave, I think most of it is on speculating in the market. Basically, it's a form of leverage. That's like 90% of it probably. And I think, we all anticipate a Bitcoin centric bull market in the near future. I think that's what most of us think. I definitely think that's coming. So we want to maximize our exposure to Bitcoin. So it'd be great if we could use our Bitcoin to get more Bitcoin so that we could make more in this bull market, right? We're borrowing against the future value of our Bitcoin now, right? So if I have 10 Bitcoin and I borrow 5, and then you can loop with what you borrowed, right? So you can get closer to maybe 8 or 9 Bitcoin extra. Now I've got 8 or 9 Bitcoin extra, so a total of 18 or 19 Bitcoin that I ride up from 70K to 200K or whatever happens, right? So that's why.
Right.
So I think that's the major use case. Although I do think people will, once they realize they can borrow stable coins against their Bitcoin and then turn those stable coins into payments for their house or their car or whatever, or their tax bill, I think we will start seeing more of that, but we're not seeing it yet.
Right. It's still pretty early. And I do think that it's going to take a while for people to get really comfortable with this. I mean, just time, right? Like, this thing came out. You get a bunch of degens like us that are jumping in, but that it's one thing now, but if there's a Lindy effect, right? So if this thing can last a year or two, without any incident or anything, then I think people are going to get very comfortable and try to jump in. So guys, where do they find this stuff? So it's on thorchain.com/ or just thorchain.com.
I just go to Shapeshift, actually. That's where I'd send most people. Okay. And just go to Shapeshift. Use the Shapeshift wallet just because it makes life easy.
Okay.
And just go. Load your Bitcoin from your ledger into the Shapeshift wallet. It's safe.
Right. And I would say also I would recommend doing it on desktop, on web, and not on mobile. I know it does work on mobile, but I've heard a lot of people have problems on mobile.
Yeah.
So I just I would just say on desktop, there's no problems. You don't have to install any, Chrome plugin either. You can just, they have one, but you don't need to install it. So, okay, great, Mark. Well, thanks. We had a pretty big audience. We have 3,500 people looking at it.
Wow.
Right. Look at it on the top, but pretty.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah. So, it's not so many people talking, but a lot of people watching. So yeah. And look, again, I just want to reiterate 100%. This is not financial advice, and neither Mark nor I have any economic incentive. We are not paid by Eric Voorhees. We're not paid by Thorchain.
Well, I did borrow some Maroon. I mean,
You did borrow some Maroon, right?
So I get, just.
And I am long. I have an interest in promoting it because I'm using it now. And so, I'm not promoting it, but I'm just saying I'm aligned with the thing. I want the thing to work so that they pay me back my Bitcoin. So, all right, guys, that's been an episode, and it'll be live on it. You can watch it again. Thanks again, Mark, and we'll catch up later. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.